She called me at 6 in the morning. I was already up. I'm always up before the sun at my age, standing at the kitchen window with my coffee, watching the frost on the back garden catch the first pale light. When I saw her name on the screen, something tightened in my chest. Not panic, more like recognition. The kind you feel when something you've been quietly dreading finally decides to show up. Mom. That was all she said, and then she stopped. I set my mug down. Where are you? Pearson, Terminal 1. Her voice was flat, in the way voices go flat when a person has been crying for so long they've run dry. I have Liam with me. I didn't know where else to go. I picked up my keys before she finished the sentence. The drive from my house in Oakville to the airport took 40 minutes that morning. I didn't rush. I've learned, at 64, that rushing is almost never the answer. I drove steadily, the highway still quiet, the sky going from black to gray to the faint orange that comes just before sunrise over the lake. I thought about my daughter the whole way. About how she'd looked the last time I saw her 3 months ago at Thanksgiving. Tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. Quieter than she used to be. I'd noticed it then. I hadn't said anything. That's the part I'll carry for a long time. I found her near the baggage doors, sitting on a bench with Liam asleep across her lap and 2 suitcases on the floor at her feet. That was it, 2 suitcases. My daughter, who had lived in that house for 6 years, who had worked in that family's company for 4 of those years, who had given them a grandson they parodied around at their charity events like a prop. She was sitting in airport at 6 in the morning. She was sitting in an airport at 6 in the morning with 2 suitcases and a sleeping 4-year-old. She looked up when she saw me, and her face crumpled for just a second before she pulled it back together. She'd always done that, even as a little girl. She'd fall off her bike and look at me and decide whether or not she was going to cry based on my expression. I kept my face steady. I sat down beside her and put my arm around her. "Okay," I said quietly, "let's get to the car." She told me everything on the drive back. Her mother-in-law, I'll call her what she was, had owned the company where my daughter worked as a project coordinator. Commercial real estate development, mid-size firm, offices in the financial district. My daughter had been good at her job. She'd won 2 internal performance awards in 3 years. She told me that with a kind of cautious pride, the way people share good news when they're not sure they're allowed to feel it yet. Her mother-in-law had never liked her. I'd known that from the first Christmas dinner years ago when the woman had spent the entire meal talking around my daughter as though she were a piece of furniture that had been placed slightly wrong. But she'd been careful about it, polite, in a way that left no fingerprints. The kind of woman who could make you feel worthless with a half smile and a well-timed pause. 4 days ago, Thursday, my daughter had been called into a meeting. Not a private one. A team meeting with 7 of her colleagues present and her mother-in-law sitting at the head of the table. She'd been told, in front of all of them, that her position was being eliminated due to restructuring, that her access to company systems would end at close of business, that HR would be in touch about her final pay. Restructuring. No one else's position was eliminated. I checked, later. Not one other person. She drove home. Her husband was there. He'd known, she realized. He hadn't warned her. He sat on the couch while she stood in the hallway, still holding her bag, and he said it was probably for the best. That maybe this was a chance for her to figure out what she really wanted to do. That his mother thought it was best if things went back to being more separate. She asked him what that meant. He said his mother felt that Liam should spend more time in their environment, that she'd already spoken to a family lawyer about what an arrangement might look like. My daughter packed 2 suitcases that night. She took her son and she walked out of that house. That was the right thing to do, and I told her so. What her mother-in-law didn't know, what my son-in-law had apparently never told her, or perhaps had never realized the full weight of, was who I was before I retired. I spent 31 years as a commercial real estate lawyer, not a junior associate, not someone who reviewed contracts and passed them up the chain. I was a partner at a firm in Toronto for the last 18 of those years. I've negotiated transactions worth more than some small municipalities' annual budgets. I've sat across the table from people who've tried to intimidate me with wealth, with connections, with carefully worded threats dressed up as reasonable concern. I retired 2 years ago. Mostly, I still consult, I still have my license, and I still have relationships, real, decades-long professional relationships, with people at every level of the Ontario real estate and legal world. I had never interfered in my daughter's marriage. Not once. Even when I had concerns, even when I saw things I didn't like. I believed she had the right to live her own life, make her own choices, find her own way through things. I am not the kind of mother who inserts herself. I've watched other women do that and seen the damage it leaves. But this was not a matter of a difficult marriage or a personality clash. A woman had used her economic power to destroy my daughter's livelihood, and then she had suggested that my daughter's access to her own child was a negotiating point. That's where it stopped being something I could politely stay out of. I spent the first 2 days getting my daughter settled. I have a spare room on the main floor, and I set it up for her and Liam. I ordered things that a 4-year-old needs: a nightlight, extra blankets, some books. I cooked. I listened. I let her sleep in when Liam let her. And then, when she was stable enough that I could leave her alone for a few hours, I drove into the city. I have a storage room in the basement of this house where I keep files going back 20 years. Some people think that's excessive. I've always thought of it as a form of patience. You never know what might become useful. I also started asking questions. Not loudly, not in any way that would be visible. The real estate world in the GTA is large but not infinite. People know people. I knew that the family had significant holdings, commercial properties, a few residential developments, their flagship office building in the King Street corridor. I also knew something they didn't know I knew. When my daughter had first started dating her husband, years before they were married, I had done what any careful person in my position would do. I'd looked into the family. Publicly available information, nothing improper. And I had noticed something in the property records that had struck me as slightly unusual at the time. A discrepancy in a title transfer involving a piece of land in Etobicoke that had changed hands 3 times in 18 months, in a way that suggested someone had been managing around a complication. I'd filed it away. I hadn't known if it would ever matter. It mattered now. I called a colleague of mine, a man I'd worked alongside for 15 years, now retired but still deeply connected to the title insurance world. I asked him if he'd heard anything about that property. He had. More than I'd expected. The short version: the land that one of the family's most significant developments sat on had a title issue that had never been properly resolved. An easement that had been granted decades ago to a neighboring landowner, a woman who had since passed away, had never been extinguished. When she died, her estate had been handled by a trust. That trust had eventually been wound down, and its remaining assets, including that easement, her name was on a document I'd seen years ago without fully understanding its significance. That beneficiary was my aunt. My aunt had died 8 years ago. She'd left her estate to me. I had spent 2 weeks going through her papers at the time and had found nothing of significant value. Some furniture, some jewelry, some old correspondence. I had not known there was an easement. I hadn't known to look for one. It had sat there, unrecognized, in a drawer in my filing cabinet. I pulled out her estate file the night I came home from my colleague's office. I sat at my kitchen table under the lamp, and I went through every page. Liam had gone to sleep. My daughter was watching something quietly on her phone in the next room. I found it at 11:45 at night. 1 page. Signed, witnessed, registered. I sat with it for a long time. An active, unextinguished easement running across the northwest corner of a property doesn't automatically mean a development is invalid. But it does mean that the development was built with an encumbrance that should have been disclosed, should have been resolved, and was not. It means that any title insurance policy issued on the property potentially has an undisclosed claim against it. It means that any future sale, refinancing, or major transaction involving that property would require this to be cleared, and clearing it would require the cooperation of the person who held the easement, which was me. I didn't make any calls that week. I didn't send any letters. I did retain a real estate litigation colleague of mine, someone I trust completely, someone sharp and careful, and I asked her to review everything and confirm my understanding. She came back to me 4 days later and said I was correct in my reading. "What do you want to do with this?" she asked me. "I want to wait," I said, "just a little while." In the meantime, my son-in-law had begun sending messages to my daughter. Not apologies exactly, more like repositioning. He was sorry things had gone so fast. He thought there had been a misunderstanding. His mother had been under a lot of pressure. Maybe they could talk. She showed me every one of them. I read them carefully. I noticed he never said his mother was wrong. He never said what she'd done at that meeting was wrong. He said he wanted to find a path forward. He said Liam needed his father. That last part was true. I told my daughter that honestly. Whatever had happened, her son needed a relationship with his father, and I would never be the person who stood in the way of that. But there is a difference between a father and a grandmother using a child as leverage. My daughter had already spoken to a family lawyer, a good one, someone I'd recommended quietly, someone with 30 years of family law experience in Ontario. She knew where she stood. She knew her rights. She knew that the custody conversation was going to happen on proper legal ground, not in someone's boardroom. The family was planning an event, a reception at a hotel in Yorkville, to celebrate the completion of their newest development. I knew about it because my daughter had received an invitation, an oversight, presumably, on someone's part, or perhaps a form of cruelty dressed up as formality. She wasn't going to go. I thought about it. I called the hotel's event coordinator. I had stayed at that hotel many times over the years for professional events, and I knew the general manager, not well, but well enough to have his direct line. I made a reservation for dinner at the restaurant on the same evening. That was all. I wore a gray suit. I've never been someone who dresses for drama. I was there to have dinner. That was the truth. I didn't expect what happened. I was having coffee when my son-in-law's family arrived in the lobby. I could see them from my table near the entrance to the restaurant. His mother was wearing red. She looked exactly as she always looked, composed, expensive, certain. She was talking to someone I recognized, a developer whose name appears in the business section regularly. She looked up as she passed and she saw me. I looked back at her. I didn't smile. I didn't nod. I simply looked at her with the full knowledge of what I was holding, and then I returned to my coffee. I don't know what she felt in that moment. I can only tell you what she did. She stopped. She said something to the man she was with, and then she walked over to me. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said. "I imagine not," I said. She sat down across from me without being invited. That told me a lot. People who are truly certain of their position don't need to do that. "I hope you understand," she said, "that what happened with the company was purely a business decision." "I understand that's how you've framed it," I said. A pause. "Your daughter was always welcome in our home. We have nothing but respect for her. But the company has needs, and I received some interesting documents recently," I said. I kept my voice the same way I've kept it in 1,000 negotiations, even, friendly, almost. "Related to a property in Etobicoke. I thought you might like to know that before the evening goes any further." She looked at me. I said nothing else. I let it sit there. "I'm not sure what you mean," she said. "You will be," I said. "Your counsel will explain it. I'd suggest you call them first thing tomorrow." I set down my cup. "Enjoy your event." I left enough on the table to cover dinner and a generous tip, put on my coat, and walked out. My daughter's lawyer received a call 6 days later. Not from the mother-in-law directly, from her legal team. They wanted to discuss a resolution. My lawyer and I had already prepared our position carefully. We were not interested in revenge. That might surprise you, but it's true. I was not trying to take anything from anyone. What I wanted was very specific. I wanted the custody discussion to happen equitably, without pressure, without anyone using financial leverage against my daughter. I wanted the termination to be reclassified in a way that properly reflected what it was, so it wouldn't affect her references or employment insurance. And I wanted her mother-in-law to stay out of the legal proceedings. In exchange, I would cooperate on the easement resolution in a straightforward and timely manner. These are not complicated terms, they're fair terms. The kind of terms that make sense when both parties are acting in good faith. They agreed within 2 weeks. My son-in-law came to the house in April. Not to speak to me. My daughter had arranged that herself, without me. They sat at the kitchen table while I took Liam for a walk through the neighborhood. It was one of those early spring days where the sun is warm, but there's still cold underneath it. Liam wanted to look at every dog we passed. He asked me why dogs don't wear boots in winter. I told him some of them do. By the time we got back, her husband was gone. My daughter was standing at the counter with a cup of tea, looking out the window at the yard. "Okay?" I asked. "Yeah," she said. "He wants to be a good dad. I think he does, actually." I nodded. "He knew, though," she said. "About the meeting. He knew before it happened." "I know," I said. We stood there in the kitchen for a minute. Liam came in behind us and asked if we had any of the cookies with the jam in the middle. I told him to check the tin on the second shelf. She found a new position in June. A project manager role at a smaller firm, better hours, closer to home. She called me from the parking lot after her first day, and she sounded like herself again. Actually like herself, not the careful, muted version I'd been watching for years. "It went well," she said. "Of course it did," I said. She laughed. "You don't have to say it like that." "Like what?" "Like you knew." "I did know," I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Mom, did you ever tell her? About the easement, about any of it? Did you ever consider not using it?" I thought about that honestly. "Yes," I said. "For about 10 minutes. What changed your mind?" I looked out my kitchen window at the garden, the lilac by the fence coming into bloom. "She used Liam," I said. "Everything else I could have let go, but she used your son. That I wasn't going to walk away from." My daughter didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "Thank you." I told her she didn't have to thank me. That's not what this was. This was simply what you do when someone mistakes your silence for weakness and your patience for an absence of teeth. I have been quiet about a great many things for a great many years. I've been polite where politeness was called for, and restrained where restraint served better than action. But I have also spent 31 years understanding exactly how power works, and how paper works, and how the distance between a person's certainty and the actual ground they're standing on can sometimes be measured in a single document filed in a county office decades before any of this began. She thought she knew what kind of woman I was. She saw a retired grandmother in an Oakville house. She saw someone who could be managed. She didn't know the half of it, and that, more than anything else, is what I want other women to hear. The quiet ones are not the harmless ones. The ones who don't raise their voices, who don't make threats, who sit across from you at a hotel restaurant and drink their coffee and say very little. We are not soft. We've simply learned that strategy outlasts drama as passivity, and that a piece of paper in a filing cabinet can outweigh everything they've built, if you know what you're looking at. She found out.